Hello and welcome to All 24 News World News Program. To the headlines. Dozens of martyrs in latest occupation attack on Gaza aid lines. The Euro-Mediterranean Human Rights Monitor reports foreign mercenaries involved as regional aid convoy pushes toward Rafah. Also coming up, Russia unleashes massive strikes on Ukraine. Precision hits pound Kiev and Odessa, and Zelensky pleads for help after what may be the war's largest air attack. And with Los Angeles protests intensifying, Trump's Marine deployment draws fire as he claims Biden's policies caused the crisis, while local leaders call it overreach. The details are straight ahead. Welcome back to the program. First off, in our news tonight, Gaza's government media office reports that Zionist attacks on aid distribution centers have killed 36 people and wounded 208 since Tuesday, bringing the total death toll at these sites to 163 with 1,495 injured. The office condemned the occupation's use of the so-called Gaza Humanitarian Foundation as a cover to target civilians, accusing the occupation army of turning aid efforts into death traps. Similarly, Hamas said the Zionist occupation has turned so-called U.S.-Israeli aid centers into systematic death traps, luring starving civilians to kill them in an organized crime. In its statement, the movement stressed that the occupation's continued massacres against the people of Gaza for over 20 months are a stain on humanity's conscience.
The occupation lures hungry civilians only to open fire on them in a systematic crime, turning aid distribution centers into death traps run with military and security coordination. The continuation of massacres for over 20 months is a stain on conscience of humanity. We call for the isolation of this rogue entity and the prosecution of its leaders for their crimes before international courts.
The Euro-Mediterranean Human Rights Monitor says occupation forces are using foreign mercenaries to turn aid distribution points into scenes of chaos and mass killing. In a statement, the group reported its field team documented occupation troops and foreign gunmen firing directly at civilians near a distribution site west of Rafah, killing at least 14 people. The Monitor added that members of a U.S. security firm are actively engaged in combat under Israeli command, classifying them as mercenaries under international law.
Israel is recruiting foreign mercenaries to turn aid distribution points into killing zones and to carry out other operations aimed at sowing chaos and lawlessness. Our field team has documented Israeli forces along with foreign gunmen opening live fire directly on hundreds of civilians as they attempted to access an aid distribution point set up by the occupation west of Rafah, resulting in the death of at least 14 civilians. The participation of these foreign fighters in hostile acts outside their home countries on behalf of a foreign military force may constitute mercenary activity under international law.
Occupation forces have killed at least 78 Palestinians and wounded dozens more in attacks across the Gaza Strip since dawn Tuesday, according to medical sources. The death toll continues to rise as the ongoing bombardment by the Zionist occupation continues to target multiple areas of the besieged enclave.
عشان الاكل احنا بنروح من بلد لبلد عشان نجيب لنا 2 كيلو طحينه نطعم اولادنا لانه مش
نصعب علينا فراوح من الاخر ولا بنستفيد اي شيء اللي شفته كله.
The Maghreb steadfastness convoy to break the siege on Gaza arrived in Libya on Tuesday morning via the Ras Jdir crossing from Tunisia. The convoy, which set off from Algeria on Sunday, is heading to the Rafah crossing on the Egyptian-Gaza border. Citizens, activists, human rights defenders, and lawyers from 5 Maghreb countries are taking part in this grassroots initiative, supporting the global movement to lift the siege on Gaza.
قافلة الصمود ستستمر في مسيرتها.
The resilience caravan will continue its journey heading from the Libyan-Egyptian borders and then to the Rafah crossing, where it will meet with the free people of this world to say one word: stop this aggression against our people in Gaza. Stop this crime against children and against humanity. Free people from various regions of the world will meet there. They came from over 50 countries and will converge onto the Rafah crossing to express their decision and opinion and their say on the duty of breaking the siege. Enough silence, enough humiliation, and enough crime against our people in Gaza. They all departed from their respective countries so that they express their opinion.
European Parliament member Rima Hassan and fellow activists aboard the Medellin refused to sign deportation papers Tuesday following a 96-hour Israeli occupation detention. Sources confirm occupation forces will forcibly expel the group now that their holding period has expired. Hossein Burkan has more.
Once again, the Zionist entity doesn't hesitate to violate international law, this time by intercepting the sailing boat Medellin in international waters. On board were 12 activists supporting the Palestinian cause who had set out to break the Zionist blockade on Gaza, among them environmental activist Greta Thunberg and European MP Rima Hassan. As usual, the Zionist entity sticks to its well-worn script by holding 8 members of the mission hostage in blatant disregard for international law, while 4 others were forcibly deported to their respective countries.
This is yet another international a violation of international rights, adding to the list of countless of such, especially towards Palestinians, that Israel are committing by blocking and preventing humanitarian aid from entering Gaza. That is illegal.
As Greta Thunberg set foot on French soil, her fellow travelers remained hostages of Zionist forces, held for over 24 hours in full view of the entire world, unconcerned with international opinion since the beginning of the Zionist genocide in Gaza. The entity continues to disregard morality, empathy, and the imperative to help a population enduring unspeakable atrocities at the hands of a merciless army.
They did an illegal act by kidnapping us on international waters and against our will, bringing us to Israel, keeping us in the bottom of the boat, not letting us getting out and so on. But that is not the real story here. The real story is that there is a genocide going on in Gaza and a systematic starvation following the siege and blockade now, which is leading to food, medicine, water that are desperately needed to get into Gaza is prevented from doing so. But of course there are many attempts like this mission, both by sea and land, to break that siege and open up a humanitarian corridor.
This is why the Zionist war machine steers once again in international waters, simply at the thought that an inhumane blockade imposed on more than 2 million people, themselves victims of an ongoing genocide, might be broken by the action of 12 individuals on a mere sailboat.
Turning to other news, the Polisario Front has formally challenged Morocco's recent letter to the UN Security Council denouncing its claims on Western Sahara as false, misleading, and beyond all bounds of common sense. In the letter, Sidi Mohamed Omar, the movement's UN representative, systematically dismantled Rabat's allegations with documented evidence, reinforcing the Sahrawi position in the decades-long territorial dispute.
The Security Council recently received yet another letter from Morocco's permanent representative to the UN, once again crossing all bounds of reason and decorum. Not only did it repeat baseless claims about the Western Sahara issue, but it also questioned the credibility and integrity of the Security Council and its reports. On May 30, 2025, the Council reviewed its draft report to the General Assembly and adopted it without a vote. However, a non-permanent member, prompted by a Moroccan occupying state, raised a point of order during the session. The Russian Federation, responsible for drafting the report's preface this year, responded with a firm and factual reply. It is a well-established fact that the conflict in Western Sahara is an international dispute, and relevant UN bodies recognize both the Moroccan occupying state and the Polisario Front, the sole legitimate representative of Sahrawi people, as the two parties to the conflict.
The Polisario Front's representative accused the Moroccan occupation of trying to bypass the Sahrawi people's right to self-determination by promoting its colonial plan under the guise of autonomy.
The representative of the occupying state refers to the so-called Moroccan autonomy proposal of 2007, a colonial force aimed at legitimizing Morocco's illegal occupation of Western Sahara, a territory listed by the United Nations as a non-self-governing. This proposal seeks to deny the Sahrawi people their inalienable right to self-determination and independence. It is well known that the Moroccan occupying state uses this colonial proposal to conceal its ongoing opposition to a self-determination referendum, a process it officially accepted in August 1998 by endorsing the UN OAU joint settlement proposals. These proposals form the core mandate of the United Nations mission for the referendum in Western Sahara Minursul.
The Polisario Front has reaffirmed that the Sahrawi independence remains the only acceptable solution to the decades-long conflict, warning that all attempts to deny this right are doomed to fail. In a post-meeting statement, the Liberation Movement called on the UN Security Council to pressure Morocco to stop impeding Minursul's referendum mission in occupied Western Sahara.
The Permanent Office reaffirmed that all attempts to bypass the rights of the Sahrawi people are doomed to fail and lack legitimacy. It stressed that the question of Western Sahara as a decolonization issue cannot be resolved outside the framework of the Sahrawi people's exercise of their right to self-determination and independence. The Permanent Office once again called on the UN Security Council to fulfill its commitments and assume its responsibility by compelling the Moroccan occupying power to immediately remove the obstacles preventing the United Nations mission for the referendum in Western Sahara Minursul from carrying out the mandate for which it was established.
To Morocco now. The Moroccan Federation of the Democratic Left and the Moroccan Association for the Protection of Public Funds have called for protests in front of the parliament on the 14th of this month to denounce corruption and the plunder of public funds. The federation urged its members and all citizens to join the demonstration under the slogan "No to restrictions on whistleblowers of public fund crimes and no to undermining judicial independence." Moving on to a different matter. African Union Commission Chairperson Mahmoud Ali Youssef praised Algeria's steadfast commitment to the Union and its key role in advancing Africa's priorities. During a ceremony to receive the credentials of Algeria's ambassador to Ethiopia and AU representative Mohammed Khalid, both sides reaffirmed their determination to boost cooperation, especially in accelerating the implementation of Agenda 2063 for Africa's unity and prosperity. Switching focus to the war in Ukraine, the Russian Defense Ministry confirmed one of its largest airstrikes on Kiev since the war began, targeting what it called military sites with high-precision weapons and drones overnight. Moscow said the strike was in retaliation for recent Ukrainian attacks on Russian territory. Meanwhile, Ukrainian officials reported that both Kiev and the port city of Odessa were hit by waves of drones and missiles, sparking large fires and thick smoke. The assault also reached Borispol on Kiev's outskirts and several districts in Odessa. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has urged the US and Europe to respond decisively to Russia's latest overnight assault. He condemned the attack, which saw over 300 drones and 7 missiles launched across Ukraine early Tuesday. Kiev's military administration reported damage in 6 of the capital's 10 districts, with at least 1 woman injured. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen announced a proposed 18th round of sanctions against Russia, targeting its energy revenues, banks, and military industry. The package includes banning transactions with Nord Stream pipelines, tightening restrictions on banks bypassing sanctions, and lowering the G7 oil price cap on Russian crude from $60 to $45 a barrel. EU countries are set to begin discussions this week.
Russia's goal is not peace, it is to impose the rule of might. Therefore, we are ramping up pressure on Russia because strength is the only language that Russia will understand.
Moscow acknowledged Tuesday that negotiations continue over how many soldiers remains Ukraine will return, with Putin's spokesman confirming active talks but no agreement. The potential repatriation comes as the conflict enters its fourth year, with thousands of troops still unaccounted for.
There is no final understanding. We're in touch and we compare the numbers. As soon as there is a final understanding, we hope that the exchange takes place.
Switching focus to another global news story now. U.S. President Donald Trump described Iran as a tough negotiator, accusing it of demanding unrealistic terms. Speaking at a White House economic event, Trump said efforts were underway to reach a deal to avoid further destruction and loss of life, but cited uranium enrichment as the main obstacle to any agreement.
We'll see what happens. We're trying to do something with a country. They are good negotiators, but they're tough. Sometimes they can be too tough. That's the problem. Well, they're just asking for things that you can't do. They don't want to give up what they have to give up. You know what that is. They seek enrichment. We can't have enrichment. We want just the opposite.
For his part, Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesman Ismail Baqai announced that the next round of indirect talks with the United States on the nuclear file will take place Sunday in Muscat. Speaking to IRNA, Baqai said preparations are underway following earlier consultations. This will mark the sixth round of U.S.-Iran talks mediated by Oman, with previous rounds held in Muscat and Rome. And as you followed in our tonight's headlines, U.S. President Donald Trump blamed the Biden administration for the security chaos in Los Angeles, citing what he sees as lax immigration policies that allowed criminals into the country. Speaking at a press conference, Trump threatened to invoke the Insurrection Act and pledged continued National Guard deployments until all threats are eliminated.
Thank goodness we sent out some wonderful National Guard. They've really helped in a lot of problems that we're having out there. Well, the biggest change from that statement is we have an incompetent governor. So I talked about governors, but I didn't talk about he's an incompetent governor. Look at the job he's doing in California. He's destroying one of our great states. And if I didn't get involved, if we didn't bring the Guard in, and we would bring more in if we needed it, because we have to make sure there's going to be law and order. You had a disaster happening, and they now admit it was a disaster. I watched the chief yesterday, who's a good man, by the way, and he said, well, we're lucky we did this because they were overwhelmed. You saw what was happening.
California Governor Gavin Newsom announced plans to sue the federal government following President Trump's deployment of the National Guard to quell protests in Los Angeles. Posting photos of soldiers sleeping on the ground, Newsom accused Trump of disrespecting U.S. troops, saying they were sent without basic supplies. He called the move an abuse of power driven by the ego of a dangerous president, insisting it had nothing to do with public safety.
U.S. Marines have served honorably across multiple wars in defense of democracy. They are heroes. They shouldn't be deployed on American soil facing their own countrymen to fulfill the deranged fantasy of a dictatorial president. This is un-American.
In a similar reaction, Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass on Monday condemned the Trump administration's deployment of National Guard and Marine units to suppress immigrant rights protests as unconditional testing ground for militarized policing, revealing troops lacked basic provisions while being ordered to raid workplaces rather than target criminals as originally claimed.
We need to stop the raids. This should not be happening in our city. It is not warranted, and the only thing it does is contribute to chaos. This was chaos that was started at Washington, D.C. On Thursday, the city was peaceful. On Friday, it was not, because of the intervention of the federal government. And it's, again, I don't think our city should be a test case, a laboratory.
The U.S. Department of Defense confirmed Tuesday the deployment of 700 Marines to Los Angeles amid ongoing protests against President Donald Trump's immigration policy. U.S. Northern Command stated that Marines from the 2nd Battalion, 7th Regiment, 1st Marine Division will be integrated with the 10th Marines Task Force 51 to support operations in the area. Moving on to the war in Sudan, the Sudanese armed forces and allied units in Al-Fashir, North Darfur, affirmed their control of the situation and vowed to continue efforts to liberate all of Darfur. Speaking to All24 News, Ahmed Hussein Mustafa, spokesperson for the Joint Force of Armed Struggle Movements, said the Rapid Support Forces and their allies fled after failing in direct combat, resorting instead to bombing residential areas and refugee camps with warplanes and drones.
The situation in Al-Fashir is under the complete control of the Sudanese armed forces, the joint forces of the armed struggle movement, the rest of the regular forces, and the popular resistance. The rapid support militias and their allies, after their failure on the ground, have begun to use the methods of the helpless, which are trying to bombard the city from outside with heavy artillery, as well as using strategic drones targeting residential neighborhoods and camps for the displaced.
The Rapid Support Forces killed at least 179 civilians and wounded dozens more in May through relentless artillery attacks on residential areas of North Darfur's capital, Al-Fashir, according to the Sudan Doctors Network. The medical group documented daily bombardments targeting neighborhoods and displacement camps, including recent massacre in a Shorfa and Abu Shuk camp that left scores dead. The RSF has openly admitted to escalating atrocities against civilians. Elsewhere in Africa, media sources in Mali report the launch of a new opposition party by politician Aliou Babakar Diallo, calling for a return to constitutional order. Diallo, who placed third in the 2018 presidential election, named the party the National Resistance Front and urged citizens to mobilize against the junta's decision to dissolve political parties under the leadership of Assimi Goïta.
The National Resistance Front calls on all patriotic Malians, both within the country and across the diaspora, to organize and unite in order to put an end to this violation of our constitution and this unconstitutional seizure of power.
And before we wrap up, let's catch up on more international news stories in the News in Brief with Usama Ayadi.
9 people have been killed in a shooting on Tuesday at a high school in Austria's second largest city, Graz. Police said that several more were seriously injured, confirming that the shooter is also dead. Costa Rica seized over 3 tons of cocaine headed to Europe. Authorities revealed that the quantity was found in a container with fresh fruit bound. Costa Rica's Minister of Public Security also affirmed that the cocaine was stopped at the airport of Antwerp. 1 person was killed and 4 injured as a result of a drone attack on a gas station in Russia's Belgorod region. The local governor blamed the attack on Ukraine, as a video showed that the gas station and the supermarket on its territory were destroyed in ruins. 6 crew members from a cargo ship that erupted in explosions and fires in the Indian Ocean were taken to a hospital in the southern Indian city of Mangaluru on Monday. The one High 503 had been en route from Colombo in Sri Lanka to Mumbai, India's financial capital. Russia and Ukraine said they exchanged an unspecified number of sick and wounded prisoners of war on Tuesday under an agreement reached at peace talks last week in Turkey. The handover took place after an initial swap of prisoners under the age of 25 was conducted on Monday.
That's the end of our news program for tonight. For more updates, you can always check our social media platforms. Thanks for watching, and good night.